Hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar, Getting Up to Speed on the New South Wales Government's Planning Reforms. My name's Mark Skelsey, and I will be your facilitator tonight. So first of all, we'd just like to do an acknowledgement of country. Willoughby City Council acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today, the Gamaragal people, and their connections to land, waters, and community. And just to let you know, the council representatives that are taking part in tonight's webinar, our Mayor, Tanya Taylor, our Head of Planning, Mitchell Noble, and myself. And I'd just now like to introduce our Mayor, Tanya, to make some opening remarks.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome everyone. It's great to see so many people interested in planning and housing and the future of our LGA. So since these reforms were announced by the state government late last year, we've seen a lot of interest in the community. So we appreciate the current housing affordability challenge. However, we have significant questions as to whether the proposed reforms will be in the best interests of this community. Now, while these aren't council reforms, we understand that planning rules and regulations can be quite complicated and it can be difficult to decipher what the proposed changes mean. So as a result, we've put together this webinar, and tonight is about council using its resources and in-house expertise to explain what we know about the state government's proposed reforms and what they could mean for Willoughby. As I mentioned, these aren't council's reforms, so if you have any concerns or you want to provide feedback, it's crucial that you do so direct to the state government, and we'll let you know how you can do that throughout the webinar. So hopefully tonight we'll be able to clarify what's proposed so that you can be confident in making your submission or representation to a New South Wales Government representative if you so wish. As you'll hear, Council will be making a submission ourselves, which it will consider at its March meeting. And I have literally just come from another meeting with the Northern Sydney Regional Organisation of Councils, made up of 7 councils within the Northern Sydney region, and we will also be making a submission on behalf of our councils. So thank you for taking an interest in this webinar. I'll now hand you back over to Mark to talk you through the agenda and some general housekeeping.
Thank you, Mayor Tanya. So you can see the agenda there on screen. We're just getting through a welcome and housekeeping at the moment. We're then going to have a staff presentation from Mitchell about some detail of these reforms. We're then going to have questions from the community, people on the call, and some closing remarks from Mayor Tanya. If we do get a lot of questions, it is possible that we may extend the event by 10 or so minutes, but let's just see how we go there. So just in terms of housekeeping, you can use the Zoom question function. So that's like a written question function there to lodge questions online while Mitchell's presentation is taking place. We will seek to answer those questions here verbally following the presentation. So we won't be answering the questions during the presentation. At some stage during the question part of the evening, we'll also be taking verbal questions. That's from you actually speaking online after the presentation, and I'll give you a little bit more detail about how we're going to do this after Mitchell's presentation. It's possible we may not get to all the questions, and we may actually have to choose some of the questions that we think really add most value and would be of widest interest to everyone. We will be making the presentation part of the event available online, but not the question time session at the end. So just the staff presentation and Mayor Tanya's remarks. We're looking at making that available hopefully by tomorrow. And finally, as I know everyone is, we ask for the questions to be calm and respectful for the people in attendance here. So with that, I'm going to hand across to Mitchell to commence his presentation.
Hi everyone, I'm Mitchell Noble. I'll be talking you through Council's understanding of the proposed reforms so we can help you to understand them and make a submission. I'll start with setting the scene. There's a number of reforms the government has recently announced, and they fall into three categories. There's the proposed creation of 33 transport-oriented development precincts across Greater Sydney. We have one station within that area, and I'll talk you through that in some later slides. We have a proposed height and floor space bonus of up to 30% for providing up to 15% affordable housing for 15 years. And then the third category, and this is the reforms that are on exhibition at the moment, planning changes to encourage more and larger low and mid-rise development types in existing urban areas. So I just wanted to touch on the key messages first here, and I'll put them as simply as I can because they're quite complex. So the reforms will override our planning controls to allow more dual occupancies on smaller lots across most of the local government area, including in heritage conservation areas. Terraces, townhouses and villa developments and two-story residential flats will be allowed in low density residential areas. And there will be taller and denser apartments and mixed-use development in the R3 medium density residential zone within 800 metres of stations and local centres. And an example of that is North Willoughby, Castle Crag and Narrabeen. There'll also be the very fast rezoning of land within 1.2 kilometres of Crow's Nest Station, which includes significant portions of Narrabeen and St Leonards. Throughout the reforms, the government refers to different housing types as low and mid-rise housing. At the outset, I wanted to clarify using the government's images here what those are. So at the top left, we have dual occupancies. That's two houses on one parcel of land, up to 2 stories. Terraces, which is also referred to as multi-dwelling housing. That can be 3 or more dwellings on one parcel of land. And then manor homes, which are a 4-pack of apartments up to 2 stories. In terms of mid-rise development, generally speaking, that's apartments ranging from 3 stories to 6 stories. The map we have on the screen at the moment is showing the affectation of the changes to our R2 zones. R2 zones are the low density residential areas of Willoughby Council. So at the base, we have an orange colour. The light orange colour is the R2 low density residential zone. We also have in hatched red our heritage conservation areas. In those areas, council doesn't allow dual occupancies, but in the light orange areas, it does. So if you're in a conservation area at the moment, dual occupancies aren't permitted. Then in the blue, we have a radius of 800 metres of stations and local centres throughout Willoughby. These are the areas being targeted for low-rise housing, and I'll talk you through exactly what that means. So in the R2 zones, anywhere in the R2 zones, dual occupancies will have some changes to the controls. So this table is showing you quite a bit of information, but essentially on the left we have the council controls. In the middle we have the state's controls that exist that kind of override our controls already. And then we have changes that are proposed through the reforms that are being exhibited. What we can see here is that the minimum lot size for dual occupancy development will be reduced. So council currently allows it dual occupancy development where the lots are either 700 to 900 metres squared, and that'll be reduced to 450 square metres. The minimum frontage for dual occupancies under the proposed controls are reduced to 12 metres from 15, and the height of dual occupancies can be 9.5 metres, which is up from 8.5. Dual occupancies could also be denser. You can see the controls there would be 0.65 to 1, which is a floor space ratio. And then the landscaped area, the area for soft landscaping, tree planting, grass, and so on will be less as well. Also, they'll be permitted in heritage conservation areas where they're not currently permitted. So in summary, there'll be more dual occupancies on smaller lots across most of the local government area, including in heritage conservation areas where council doesn't currently permit them. In the R2 zones near stations and centres, so you have to be in the R2 zone and you have to be within the blue area on the map that I showed you earlier, which is an 800-metre radius of the centres and station. Multi-dwelling housing and manor homes will be permitted. So that will mean including heritage conservation areas, manor homes, which is the 4-pack of apartments up to 2 stories, multi-dwelling housing, which is terraces, and other forms will be permitted on 500 square metre lots, as little as 12-metre frontages, 9.5 metre height of buildings, and density controls to match. The landscape area will be between 20 and 30% of the total site area for those forms of development. And just as a refresher, I'll just touch back on that map. Mark, if you can click inside the presentation just so I can click back.
Sorry, what's happening?
Oh, if you could just press the mouse inside the presentation.
Oh, sorry.
You're right. There we go. So the first slides that I showed you were applying only to the orange zones, and the next set you had to be within the orange zone and the radius. So that's where multi-dwelling housing and manor homes would be switched on. I'll keep on taking you through. So now I'll talk to you about changes occurring in the R3 medium density residential zones under the proposed reforms. And in these changes, the government's really targeting the forms of development on the left-hand side there. So apartment buildings from 3 to 6 stories. So on the map, we've got the red colour. That's the R3 medium density residential zone. We currently allow apartment buildings in them, but with large minimum lot sizes. Then we've got the radiuses again, 800 metres from stations, but we've also got a lighter green colour to indicate the 0 to 400 metre radius from the stations. Because, as I'll show you in the next slide, development is allowed to be higher and denser in those areas than we would ordinarily permit. So in those R3 zones, residential flat buildings will be allowed to be higher and denser than the council would ordinarily allow. So I mentioned the minimum lot size at the moment is reasonably large. It's 1,100 square metres. There would be no minimum lot size for anywhere within the station catchments and centre catchments. The height could be up to 21 metres, which is about 6 stories. Currently, we allow up to 12 metres, which is about 3 or 4 stories. And the reforms outside of the 400 metre radius, so 400 metres to 800 metres from stations and centres, would allow development up to 16 metres, which is about 4 stories. The floor space ratio would be 3 to 1 for the areas closer to the railway stations and local centres, and 2 to 1 for the sites that are a little bit further away in the 400 to 800 metre radius. Both would require DAs, is our understanding. So I've taken you through the part of the reforms that's currently on exhibition. So those changes are being exhibited by the government. They're not council's proposed changes. They're proposed by the state government, and they're on exhibition until the 23rd of February, which is next Friday. You can get to the government's page on this via the Have Your Say link on the planning portal, and everyone who's registered their emails with us on this webinar will supply a link to you after this briefing. Council will be making a draft submission in time for the deadline. Unfortunately, we won't have that ready in time for a council meeting, but we have confirmation from the government they'll accept an endorsed submission at a later date in March. So that report will be going to council in March for its consideration.
So, Mitchell, just to clarify then, so that really should say the March meeting rather than the February meeting in the presentation.
Yeah,
is that right?
Excuse me.
So we'll just amend that to say that it will be considered actually at the March meeting, not the February meeting.
Thank you. I want to move on now to the transport-oriented development program. So another set of reforms or changes proposed by the state government, where they've identified stations across Sydney that will undergo accelerated planning. Now, really, we don't have any stations within Willoughby LGA itself, but one of the station selectors is Crow's Nest, which is 1,200 metres away from parts of Narembeen. So I'll show a map in a moment, but there are areas of our local government area to the south that are affected and will be considered for further planning changes. We don't know a lot of details about this program, only that the program will mean there will be a plan exhibited by the government in April with the intention for that to be implemented in November of this year. So that's something that we will have an opportunity to comment on when the government exhibits that work. The map of the affected area. So in the centre bottom, you can see the Crow's Nest station, and the radius of 1,200 metres extends right up to Narembeen. As I mentioned, exhibition in April, rezoning in November, and consultation is separate. It's not being, comments are not being sought by the government on this particular aspect of its reforms now. Another part of these reforms is the affordable housing bonuses. So projects that include at least 10 to 15% of the gross floor area as affordable housing can have access to bonuses of 20 to 30% for extra floor space and 20 to 30% of extra height. Bonuses will be allowed if the project is within 800 metres walking distance of land zoned E1 local centre, MU1 mixed use, B1 neighbourhood centre, B2 local centre, or B4 mixed use. There's no requirement to retain the affordable housing after 15 years. So that means that that housing could then revert back to traditional market housing after that period of time. So I've given you the overview of the three main reforms being proposed. What I thought we'd do here is talk about some of the council staff concerns, noting these haven't been endorsed by the elected officials yet. But at this stage, the officers have these concerns about the proposed reforms. One of the main ones is that the changes, as you've seen in the maps, are quite broad, large scale. They create a lot of additional capacity for growth within our area. And the impacts of that haven't been assessed or investigated. We don't have studies showing what they would be, and we would like that information to be available if it has been done. We're concerned about the infrastructure capacity, thinking of state and local roads, schools, community facilities, parks, and so forth from this uplift, and the loss of character of our suburbs, particularly in the heritage conservation areas where manor homes and dual occupancies, for example, are not currently permitted, and we expect that will have an impact, and we're concerned about that. We're concerned about the amenity outcomes, such as loss of privacy and overshadowing as a result of this uplift as well, and that hasn't been considered. And we're concerned that as we try to hit our tree canopy cover targets and provide open space, private open space, and vegetation on private property, that's going to be very challenging to do when we have very small and reduced areas for soft landscaping. We're also concerned that there's a lot of capacity that's already been switched on through the making of Council's new local environmental plan, which occurred in June last year, where the Council created uplift that could result in about 6,500 additional dwellings, and that's already online, so we've already delivered a significant amount of growth